Black
told you to put your phone away
CEO
right
forced
now.
out a
That is a federal
VIP seat for
regulation,
white
and I will have you
passenger
arrested when
hours
we
later.
land.
She replaced the
Comply with the crew's
entire
instructions
crew.
immediately, or we will
Hello,
have you removed from
everyone.
this aircraft.
Before we
every right
begin
to be
today's
here.
I am
video,
not
I
getting off
need
this
your
plane.
help.
Stop resisting
We've noticed that
immediately.
the
You
channel
are
is
being
losing
detained, and you will be
traction,
removed from
and
this aircraft by
subscribing
the
is one of the
authorities.
best ways you can
End the
help
call right
us.
now, or we will have you
It's
removed from
quick,
this aircraft upon
free,
landing.
and allows us to
do
continue
that. I have
bringing you
diplomatic
great
immunity.
content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this
I assume
channel
this means I get
growing
the upgrade.
collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The cabin had been quiet, soft engine hum, clinking glasses from the galley, the low luxury of a long-haul business-class flight, until her voice cut straight through it. You need to move now. It wasn't a request. It was a verdict hurled across the aisle. Heads snapped up instantly. A few passengers froze mid-pour, others already reaching for their phones. The overhead lights reflected off polished seat shells and half-finished champagne flutes as the tension tightened like a drawn wire. The flight attendant stood inches from him, face flushed, posture leaning forward, one finger jabbing the air like she was staking a claim. Her uniform looked crisp, but her composure was unraveling. Meanwhile, he didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even adjust the brim of his navy cap. The black man in seat 2 Amperes sat anchored in a calm so heavy it changed the temperature around him. One hand rested on the armrest, the other on his phone. His expression didn't rise to meet her anger. It stayed grounded, quiet, assessing, unshaken. A few rows back, someone whispered, "Why is she yelling like that?" Another, "Is something wrong with his ticket?" But the phones rising into the air said everything. People knew this scene too well. The attendant leaned closer, voice sharpening. "This seat is reserved for one of our VIP Platinum passengers. You were assigned the wrong cabin. You must move. Now." She didn't even hide the way her eyes flicked to the white passenger waiting nearby, arms folded, pretending not to be involved. But Dva didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, no attitude, just clarity, and asked, with a voice soft enough to be unsettling, "Are you certain?" The question didn't match her aggression. It didn't match the moment. It made the moment worse for her. Before she could answer, the man in 3 Amperes lifted his phone higher, recording openly now. A woman across the aisle covered her mouth, whispering to her husband, "She's going to regret that." The attendant's jaw clenched. "I said move that seat. Don't make this difficult." But the cabin wasn't watching her anymore. They were watching him, watching how he stayed still while the world tried to shrink him. He finally exhaled once, slow, steady, a breath that held decades of practice. And right then, right as the story was about to shift, he glanced calmly at the nearest camera, pointed his way. Before the next line dropped, a voiceover moment opened like a cinematic pause. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here." Now, back to him. The cabin fell silent again, waiting for the next move. Not from the attendant losing control, but from the man she had just underestimated. For a long second, nothing moved in the cabin. The overhead lights hummed. A champagne flute rattled on a side table. Someone swallowed hard in row 3. The flight attendant's finger was still hanging in the air, caught between command and panic, like even she wasn't expecting his calm question to knock the balance out of her. "Are you certain?" The words replayed in the cabin like an audio glitch. She blinked, thrown off, then leaned closer, her shadow falling across his tray table. "I don't need to be certain," she snapped. "I have the manifest, and you are not on this list for a VIP seat. You need to move now." Phones lifted higher. The entire aisle felt narrower. The black man in 2 Amperes sat exactly as before, body still, expression unreadable. Only his eyes shifted, taking in the flight attendant's posture, the way her voice trembled not with fear but entitlement. Behind her, the white passenger she was trying to seat cleared his throat, pretending he had no role in this. His arms were crossed, chin lifted, eyes darting between the unfolding scene and the phones recording it. A young man across the aisle whispered into his camera, "She's not even checking his boarding pass. She just decided." Another passenger murmured, "Why is she rushing him like that? Something's off." But the flight attendant didn't hear any of it. Or maybe she did and pushed harder. She slapped her hand against the seat shell beside 2 Amperes, her voice rising. "Sir, you are holding up this cabin. If you don't move, I will have to—" He cut her off with nothing but silence. A controlled inhale. shoulders settling. A stillness so deliberate it made her stumble half a step back. Then he reached slowly toward his side pocket. Phone zoomed in. Even the attendant flinched. But all he pulled out was a small black leather card sleeve. He didn't open it. Not yet. He simply held it in one hand, resting on his knee, while he studied her with the kind of patience that made the moment heavier, not lighter. "Before you go further," he said quietly, "you may want to double-check the list you're so confident about." Her jaw tightened. "I don't need to double-check a thing. I know what I'm doing." Someone behind her whispered, "Does she?" Another answered, "No, and she's about to find out." The attendant straightened her shoulders, trying to regain the authority that had slipped from her grip. "This is your final warning. Stand up and move to economy or I will call the purser." He looked up at her, the cabin lights catching a small glint in his eyes. "Call whoever you need," he said softly. "I'm not moving." The calm landed like a strike. A flush crept up her neck. Her breathing picked up. For a moment, even she seemed to realize she had taken this farther than protocol allowed. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Fine. You asked for it." She reached for her radio. Every passenger held their breath. And in the quiet that followed, the man in 2 amperes finally opened the leather sleeve just enough for a hint of gold to catch the cabin light. The atmosphere shifted. Not a twist, not a reveal, just a warning. A promise the story was about to turn. The purser hadn't even arrived yet, but the atmosphere in the cabin had already shifted. You could feel it like pressure before a storm. The flight attendant still gripped her radio, knuckles whitening. But her confidence? It was slipping, dripping through her fingers like sand she couldn't hold on to. All because he hadn't moved. All because he wouldn't move. Across the aisle, a woman with gold-rimmed glasses slowly lowered her champagne flute. "This doesn't look right," she murmured, eyes narrowing. Her seatmate whispered back, "She didn't even scan his boarding pass. She just walked up and started yelling." And the phones were everywhere now. Rows 3, 4, 5. Screens lifted, lenses pointed, recording the tension unfolding in real time. The white passenger waiting for the seat cleared his throat again, louder this time, as if trying to signal that he was the victim in all this. He straightened his blazer, looking annoyed at the spectacle. The black man in 2 amperes didn't even glance at him. The leather card sleeve still rested in his hand, closed, unthreatening, but impossibly commanding. He didn't brandish it. He didn't rush the reveal. He let the silence do the heavy lifting. The flight attendant tried to reclaim her authority. "Sir, if you continue resisting, I'll have to—" A voice cut through the aisle. Calm, steady, clear. "Excuse me." She spun around. A young black woman, mid-20 braided hair tied neatly, wearing a navy business suit, rose from row 4. Phone in hand, camera recording, posture respectful but unafraid. "I watched him board," she said. "He sat down with a business class ticket, so did I. If there's been a mistake, it's not his." The attendant stiffened, thrown off by the precision in the woman's tone. "Ma'am, please sit down," she said sharply. "This has nothing to do with you." But it did. Everyone knew it did. The young woman didn't move. Instead, she raised her phone slightly, not hostile, just documenting. "With all due respect," she said, "I've seen this situation before. Too many times." Murmurs rippled down the cabin, a ripple of truth. The black man in 2 amperes finally turned his head not to the attendant, but to the young woman who stepped up. Their eyes met for a brief, quiet second. An acknowledgement. A shared history neither had to explain. The attendant snapped, "Ma'am, sit down now or I'll have you removed as well." The threat hit the air like a slap. Passengers collectively sucked in a breath. Even the purser, approaching from the galley, paused mid-step. The young woman didn't flinch. "That's fine," she said softly. "I've got everything on video." The attendant's chest rose and fell rapidly, panic blooming behind her stern expression. Because now it wasn't just him refusing to move. It wasn't just one man standing in quiet defiance. Now there was a witness. Now there was a story forming outside her control. And as she opened her mouth to retaliate, the man in 2 amperes spoke again, voice low, steady, controlled. "You should listen to her." The line didn't raise tension. It redirected it. And suddenly, every phone aimed forward, every eye locked on him, every passenger waiting to see. What happens when calm meets arrogance? What happens when dignity refuses to bend? And what exactly was inside that card sleeve he still hadn't opened? The purser finally stepped into the aisle, tall, composed, wearing the neutral expression of someone trained to put out fires before they spread. But this one was already burning. Passengers parted slightly as she approached, giving her a narrow path to the center of the conflict. The flight attendant straightened fast, like backup had arrived. "Good," she said loudly, gesturing at the man in 2 amperes. "He refuses to move. He's blocking the VIP seat, and he's being non-compliant." Several passengers exchanged looks. Someone muttered, "That's not what happened at all." The purser raised a hand for silence, eyes shifting between them, and then she saw the phones. Dozens of them, angles capturing every second. Her voice dropped a level. "Sir, may I see your boarding?" The flight attendant jumped in again, cutting her off. "He doesn't have the right ticket, I've already checked." But that was the problem. Everyone knew she hadn't. The purser's brow tightened. "Did you scan his pass?" The attendant hesitated. A microsecond pause. It told the entire story. "No," she snapped. "I didn't need to. Look at him, he's in the wrong section." Gasps. Actual gasps rolled through the cabin. The young black woman from row 4 lowered her camera just an inch, whispering, "There it is." The man in 2 amperes remained perfectly still. Not a twitch, not a change in posture, only his fingers brushing the edge of the leather card sleeve, as if grounding himself in patience he'd learned the hard way. The purser inhaled slowly. "Let's reset." She turned to him. "Sir, may I please?" The attendant lunged forward, not violently, not enough to cause injury, but enough to cross a line. She reached for his arm, fingers closing around the sleeve of his jacket, as if to physically pull him out of the seat. That was the moment the cabin broke. A man in row 5 stood up abruptly. "Hey, don't touch him!" Another passenger said, "Lady, stop." Someone else. "You can't do that." The purser's eyes went wide. "Stop! Don't put your hands on passengers." But the damage was done. Her grip remained just long enough for every phone to catch it, the freeze frame already forming in digital memory. Her leaning forward, hand clamped on his arm, face twisted from stress or stubbornness, it didn't matter which. Slow motion. The moment stretched. His reaction wasn't anger, never anger. It was something quieter. He lowered his gaze to her hand as if he had seen this exact scene before, in airports, hotels, restaurants, places where calm black men were mistaken for problems. He exhaled, long, measured, and then he spoke not to her, not yet, to the purser. "To be clear," he said softly, "she just put her hands on me, correct?" The purser swallowed. "Yes, I saw it." Phones captured her answer from 6 angles. The attendant's face drained of color. The man in 2 amperes finally lifted the leather sleeve slightly, not opening it, just raising it enough to remind everyone. He hadn't even started yet. And the entire cabin knew. The next move wouldn't be hers. It would be his. For a heartbeat, nothing existed except her hand on his sleeve. The purser stood frozen. The passengers held their breath. Even the engines felt quieter, as if the whole aircraft leaned in to witness what happened next. The flight attendant snatched her hand back the second she realized what she'd done, but it was too late. The imprint of that moment was already locked into every camera aimed her way. The man in 2 amperes didn't flinch, didn't recoil, didn't rise or react. He simply looked at the spot where she'd touched him, then raised his gaze slowly, deliberately, until it met hers. The kind of look that didn't shout, didn't accuse, just documented. The attendant's breathing turned sharp. I only grabbed you because you refused to stand when I..." He cut in not with volume, but with precision. "You put your hands on me, on a seated passenger, without provocation." That wasn't anger. That was a record being made. A murmur rolled through the cabin like a wave. He didn't even move. She really did grab him. She crossed the line. The man in 2 amperes leaned back slightly, but something in his eyes shifted some quiet place he didn't visit unless forced. A flash of memory hit him. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just real. The last time someone had grabbed him like that, a hotel lobby, a security guard with assumptions instead of questions, the humiliation of being escorted out until the GM recognized who he was. Another time, a rental car desk, a clerk insisting his premium booking must be a mistake. He wasn't reliving trauma. He was reliving a pattern. And the pattern was standing right in front of him, shaking with indignation, radio still clutched in her hand. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You people try to make everything about..." She stopped herself. But the cabin didn't miss it. A man 2 rows behind muttered, "She was about to say it." A woman whispered, "Oh, this is bad. Real bad." The purser finally stepped forward, her tone authoritative but trembling at the edges. "Ma'am, please step aside. Now." The attendant looked betrayed. "You're taking his side? Over mine?" "I'm taking the side of procedure," the purser said. "And you've broken several." The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted around the cabin, realizing she was outnumbered by witnesses, by phones, by the truth. The man in 2 amperes lifted the leather sleeve onto his lap, still closed, still unexplained. Its presence carried more weight than anything she'd said. The purser's voice dropped lower. "Sir, we will resolve this properly, I assure you." He nodded once respectful, not submissive. But the attendant erupted again, pointing at him like she had at the start. "He's the one causing trouble. He refused my instructions. He acted suspicious." The young black woman from row 4 stepped forward again. "He acted calm," she said. "You acted loud." The cabin hummed with agreement. The man in 2 amperes finally lifted the leather sleeve between 2 fingers. Not opening, just raising it slightly, like a curtain call waiting for its cue. And the entire cabin felt it. A shift. A turning. A quiet power preparing to stand. Not with force. Not with volume. With truth. The purser stood between them now, one hand raised toward the attendant, the other subtly shielding the man in 2 amperes. But the tension didn't fall. It thickened. Passengers leaned out of their seats. Phones steadied. The aisle felt like a tunnel narrowing with every breath. The flight attendant crossed her arms, chin high, voice brittle. "He's refusing crew instructions, that's grounds for removal." Someone in the back scoffed. "Removal? For sitting in his seat?" The purser shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. Every witness had heard the word removal, and it detonated silently across the cabin. The man in 2 amperes didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His patience had shifted, still calm, but edged with something older, sharper. He set the leather sleeve on his tray table. Then he reached for his phone, not abruptly, not dramatically, just controlled, the kind of movement that meant a decision had been made. The attendant tensed like he'd pulled a weapon. "Sir, phone use is restricted during—" "It's airplane mode," he said quietly, "and I'm making a call." The purser didn't interrupt. She watched him instead, really watched him, and something in her face changed. Recognition not of who he was, but of how he carried himself. A man used to being underestimated before the truth landed. He tapped one contact. Just one. The line picked up instantly. "Yes, Mr. Cole?" A voice crisp, professional, too fast for a normal service line. The attendant blinked. Who is that?" He didn't answer her. "This is Flight 27, he said into the phone. "Business cabin. I need aviation relations on standby." The voice replied, "Already on, sir. We're monitoring your cabin feed now." The purser stiffened. The attendant's eyes widened. Several passengers exchanged looks. "Monitoring?" someone whispered. "Is he important?" The man in 2 amperes continued, tone still even. "There's been a violation of procedure, passenger handling, physical contact, hostile escalation." He never raised his voice. Not once. The attendant's breath hitched. You can't just call corporate like that." He finally looked at her. "Are you certain?" The same question from earlier, but heavier this time, weighted with proof. On the phone, the voice spoke again. "Mr. Cole, compliance is standing by. Say the word if you require a full crew review on landing." A stunned ripple moved through the cabin. The attendant stepped back, bumping into an armrest. The purser whispered, "Sir, may I ask who you are?" He didn't answer yet. He didn't need to. The tension was bending toward him now, not away. He closed the leather sleeve with 2 fingers, slow, deliberate, final. Then he said into the phone, "Prepare the file. I'll give my statement once this aircraft is on the ground." The air shifted. The attendant realized, for the first time since this began, she wasn't in control. And the passengers realized, for the first time, he always had been. The cabin had gone silent. Not the quiet of cruising altitude, but the kind that comes when everyone realizes they're standing inches from a truth they weren't ready for. The purser lowered her hands slowly, as if afraid a sudden movement might shatter the fragile air between them. The flight attendant. She wasn't yelling anymore. Her shoulders had curled inward, eyes darting from the phones to the man in 2 amperes, then back again, desperate to locate some last shred of control. But the moment had already chosen a side. Mr. Cole placed his phone face down on the tray table, the black leather sleeve beside it. Then he reached forward and opened it. Not wide, just enough. A slim metallic card slid into view. Deep obsidian black, etched with a gold crest, embossed with a code most passengers didn't recognize, but a few immediately did. A man in row 3 whispered, "Oh my God, is that an executive tier card?" His seatmate answered, "No, that's higher." "Oh." The purser's breath caught. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing, blinking once as if making sure she wasn't imagining the symbol. "Sir, that's—" He nodded calmly. "Yes." The flight attendant froze. No, that doesn't. It can't. You're not." Mr. Cole finally looked at her fully, expression steady, voice a low ember. "You've spent the last 10 minutes insisting I didn't belong in this seat," he said. Without checking a single document, he tapped the card lightly. "This seat is assigned to executive black shareholders. I'm not just cleared for it." A tiny pause. "I helped negotiate the program that created it." A ripple went through the entire cabin. Half disbelief, half a dawning sense that they had just witnessed the moment the story turned. Phone zoomed in. Someone whispered, "He's not a passenger. He's part of the airline." Another murmured, "She's finished." The flight attendant staggered back a step, hands trembling. "That card doesn't mean I didn't know you weren't dressed like—" The sentence strangled itself before it could fully leave her mouth. Mr. Cole's eyes didn't harden. That would have been too easy. They softened. The softness of someone who had heard this excuse 100 times, in 100 different forms. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said quietly. "You only needed to know your job." Silence took the aisle, dead center of that silence. The purser straightened, professionalism returning like breath after near suffocation. "Mr. Cole," she said with a respectful nod, "we apologize. This never should have happened." He didn't nod back. He simply held her gaze. "I want this handled correctly," he said. "No retaliation, no cover-ups, just accountability." "Yes, sir." The flight attendant took a shaky step forward. I didn't mean I thought—" "Mr." Cole cut through her spiraling panic with a single controlled sentence. "Intent doesn't erase impact." Her mouth closed. Her chest rose and fell too fast. Across the aisle, the young black woman with the camera whispered, "That's the line, that's the one." Mr. Cole slid the card back into the sleeve, calm as a man closing a chapter he'd already outgrown. The reveal wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to humiliate. It was meant to clarify. A man who had been talked down to had just risen without standing, and the entire cabin rose with him. The air in the cabin felt different now. Not lighter, not calmer, but corrected, like the truth had weight, and it finally settled where it belonged. The purser stood straighter than she had all flight, professionalism sharpening into something almost protective. "Mr. Cole," she said carefully, "we're initiating internal protocol. Please give us a moment." He nodded once, not granting permission, acknowledging it. The flight attendant swallowed hard, still staring at the half-closed leather sleeve like it was evidence in a trial she didn't know she was on the wrong side of. This is a misunderstanding," she stammered. "I was just following procedure." The purser's tone cut clean, firmer than before. "No. Procedure requires verification before confrontation, and you didn't verify anything." A murmur of agreement swelled from the passengers. She jumped him. "She didn't check a single document." "This is going viral." The attendant took a shaky breath, voice cracking. He didn't look like—" The cabin inhaled sharply as one. But the purser stepped in before the sentence could fully land. "Stop talking." It wasn't harsh. It was merciful. The purser tapped her earpiece. "Captain, we need a senior crew member to replace one attendant in business cabin. Immediate." The attendant blinked fast. "Replace? Replace? For what? I didn't do anything wrong." The purser didn't even look at her. "You are relieved of duty in this cabin pending formal review. You'll sit in the jump seat until landing." Passengers whispered, "That's the protocol." "Yep, same as any incident." "She's done for the day." But what struck the cabin most wasn't the disciplinary action. It was his silence. Mr. Cole hadn't spoken a word since the reveal. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't weaponize the moment. He simply existed in his own calm. And that calm was louder than her panic. The attendant's breathing went uneven. You're all acting like he's some kind of... She didn't finish. Maybe she realized she had no safe word to reach for. Then came the final shift. The white passenger who had been waiting for the seat arms crossed, hoping the crew would fight on his behalf, finally stood. But not confidently, nervously. Sir, I didn't know, he muttered to Mr. Cole. I thought the staff knew what they were doing. I didn't mean to. Mr. Cole looked at him for one long second, not unkind, not accusing. Just seeing him. I know, he said quietly. The man sat down again, smaller than before. A replacement attendant entered the cabin, whispering to the purser, who nodded once and motioned her toward service prep. Then the purser turned back to the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Service will resume shortly, and I assure you this matter is being handled. Her eyes flicked to the trembling attendant. Escort her to the jump seat. 2 crew members appeared, gently guiding the shaken woman away from the aisle. Phones recorded, but no one shouted at her. No one insulted her. The dignity belonged to him, and the cabin followed his example. As she disappeared behind the curtain, a quiet voice from row 4, the young black woman, spoke just loud enough for the nearest phones to catch. He didn't raise his voice, but she heard him anyway. The cabin exhaled, because the collapse wasn't loud. It was precise, and it had finally happened. For a few moments, the cabin floated in a strange, suspended quiet, the kind that comes only after chaos settles, and truth finally has space to breathe. Service carts were paused. Curtains stood still. Passengers stayed half-leaned out of their seats, unsure if they should resume their conversations or stay locked in the orbit of this moment. The purser adjusted her uniform jacket, chest rising with a slow, steady breath, as if grounding herself before she approached him again. Mr. Cole, she said softly, thank you for your patience. We'll make a full report. I'm deeply sorry for what you experienced. He didn't look at her immediately. His gaze stayed on the aisle where the attendant had been led away moments earlier. A thin gap in the curtain swaying slightly, like the final tremor of a storm passing. Then he looked up. Apology noted, he replied. Not forgiving too soon, not punishing either. Passengers watched with rapt attention, not because he demanded it, but because he held himself like someone who'd had to learn, again and again, how to stay whole through disrespect. The purser bowed her head. We'll correct this, today and going forward. A man 2 rows behind nodded emphatically. It needed correcting. A woman across the aisle added, it's been happening for years, just not always on camera. Phones lowered a little, not to stop recording, but out of respect. The young black woman in row 4, she who had spoken up earlier, stepped forward once more. But this time her posture was less defensive, more reverent. Sir, she said quietly, the way you handled that, it meant something. To people like me. He turned to her, not surprised, but moved in a way he didn't show strongly, just a flicker in the still water of his expression. He nodded once, a small gesture with the weight of shared history. Then she added, you kept your dignity, even when they tried to strip it. He answered with the same calm that had carried him through the entire ordeal. Dignity isn't theirs to take. A collective hush rippled through the cabin. That line, that truth, settled over everyone, soft but undeniable. Even the man who'd wanted his seat lowered his gaze, absorbing the truth in ways he'd have to wrestle with long after landing. The purser cleared her throat. Would you like anything, Mr. Cole? Water? A blanket? Maybe a moment of privacy? He shook his head politely. No, I'm fine. Let the cabin run as it should. The phrasing was subtle, but everyone felt the deeper meaning. Run correctly this time. Service resumed quietly. Drinks poured with extra care. Passengers softened their voices, as if unwilling to break the new equilibrium he'd set. The young woman returned to her seat, but before she sat, she said one last thing. Not for him, but for all the phones still recording. He didn't raise his voice, but he raised the standard. The cabin breathed that in, a new rhythm settling into the metal bones of the aircraft. Mr. Cole rested his hands on his tray table, folding the leather sleeve neatly beside him. Not flaunting it, not using it as a weapon, just placing it there. A quiet reminder that being underestimated doesn't reduce who you are. It just exposes who they are. A few rows away, an older man whispered to his wife, that's leadership, real leadership. Another person added, it's how power should look. The purser nodded slowly, as if agreeing with them all, even the ones who hadn't spoken aloud. She leaned slightly toward him. "We'll be landing in a few hours. I'll personally ensure the ground team greets you properly, sir." He didn't need that. He didn't crave it. He didn't soak in the attention. But he accepted the intention. "Thank you." And with that simple acknowledgement, the cabin shifted once more, this time into something calmer, cleaner, and undeniably more just than it had been an hour earlier. Because respect now sat in the right seat. The cabin eased back into motion, but it wasn't the same motion as before. It was slower, more deliberate, like everyone had agreed, wordlessly, to match the calm of the man in 2 amperes. Flight attendants whispered to one another behind the curtain, steps softer, service carts gliding with new caution. The replacement attendant approached him with a respectful nod, placing a glass of water on his tray table without a word. He thanked her gently. She hesitated, then replied, "If you need anything, sir, absolutely anything, please tell me." Not fear, not guilt, just respect. Rows behind him, passengers had resumed conversations, but the topics hadn't returned to business schedules, vacation plans, or wine pairings. They were talking about him. The way he stayed calm? "I couldn't have done that." "Did you see her face when he opened the card? This is going to be a case study in corporate training." Ugh. But the man in 2 amperes didn't absorb the attention. He didn't feed on it. He simply sat with his hands folded, staring at the window where clouds drifted past in slow, unbothered layers. The purser stepped into the aisle again, clipboard in hand, posture almost ceremonial. "Mr. Cole," she said softly, "we've notified ground operations. A senior representative will meet you at the gate. They're preparing a full statement process." He nodded. "Understood." She lingered a moment, long enough to show sincerity, but not long enough to intrude. Across the aisle, the young black woman from row 4 caught his eye again. She smiled, not broadly, not triumphantly, just with that quiet recognition they'd shared earlier. He offered the smallest nod in return. 2 seats back, the white passenger who had once expected the VIP seat shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat before speaking up. "Sir, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for my part in this." Mr. Cole didn't let him drown in shame. "You followed what you were told," he replied. "But now you know better." The man nodded, grateful for the grace he didn't deserve but needed. The rest of the cabin watched this exchange with a strange mix of reverence and introspection, because witnessing dignity in motion does something to people. It forces them to examine their own. A soft ding sounded overhead. The captain's voice came through the speakers, calm and clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin initial descent shortly. Please prepare for landing." The words carried a different weight today. The purser made one more pass through the cabin, checking belts, offering water, adjusting blankets. But every time she neared 2 amperes, her movements slowed, as though she wasn't just ensuring comfort, she was honoring something. And the attendant in the jump seat behind the curtain? A ghost in her own uniform now. A reminder of what happens when power is misused and assumptions go unchecked. As the aircraft began its gradual descent, the man in 2 amperes finally leaned back, closing his eyes for the first time since the confrontation began. Not out of exhaustion, not out of relief, but because the cabin, the entire cabin, finally matched the peace he'd been holding alone. The engines hummed steady, the lights dimmed for landing, and somewhere above the clouds, justice felt less like a fight and more like balance finally restored. The landing was smooth, so smooth it almost felt undeserved after the turbulence inside the cabin. But no one unclenched. Not yet. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, the purser stood in the aisle with quiet intention, shoulders pulled back, breath steadying itself. She wasn't just performing procedure now. She was carrying responsibility. When the seatbelt sign pinged off, passengers rose halfway. Not fully, not freely, but cautiously, as if waiting for Mr. Cole to move first. He didn't rush. He took a moment, sliding the leather sleeve into his jacket with the same unbothered precision he'd maintained all flight. The door opened, and waiting just outside the jet bridge was a small delegation, clean suits, polished badges, an air of controlled urgency, senior operations, customer experience, a liaison with a tablet already pulled up. They weren't there for spectacle. They were there because protocol demanded it, and because the story had reached them long before the aircraft touched down. The lead manager stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, welcome. We're here to escort you privately and begin our internal report. We appreciate your patience. He nodded once. Not impressed. Not flattered. Just acknowledging the professionalism that should have been present from the start. Passengers leaned subtly into the aisle, pretending to adjust their overhead bags just to catch the exchange. The young woman from row 4, the first witness to step up, gave him a soft nod. He returned it, a shared understanding sealed in silence. The white passenger who had been promised the seat earlier cleared his throat. "Sir, I just want to say I'm sorry for assuming." Mr. Cole met his eyes without judgment. "Learn from it," he said quietly. "That's enough." And somehow it was. He finally stepped into the jet bridge, the ground crew forming a respectful corridor around him. No applause, no spectacle, just a path carved by accountability. The door shut behind him, and the cabin released a long, collective breath, the first full breath since the conflict began, because dignity didn't leave the aircraft with him. It stayed. Outside the aircraft, the terminal glowed with late afternoon light, warm, steady, indifferent to everything that had unfolded in the sky. Mr. Cole walked through the private corridor beside the operations team, his footsteps measured, unhurried. No anger followed him, only clarity. In the reflection of the glass wall, he saw himself briefly calm, composed, unchanged by the noise that tried to diminish him. He paused just long enough to speak the truth the day had earned. "Respect," he said quietly, "should never need a boarding pass." One of the managers lowered his head, taking the words like a directive. Mr. Cole continued toward the briefing room, shoulders steady, posture untouched by the chaos left behind. He hadn't raised his voice. He never needed to. The standard rose anyway.